Hello everyone. We're going to be taking a look at the fourth round of the Lebanese Chess Championship, and here we already have a very strong matchup. And as you can see by the result, spoilers there, Amr got held to a draw by Adib. Adib was able to draw against Amr, which is a super impressive result for the rising young star. Adib, I think, is 16. So very nice result by Adib, and he sure as heck gained some nice rating points from that. So let's see how Adib was able to hold Amr to a draw. So we start off with d4, knight f6, and eventually we go into the King's Indian, but not without, not some adventures, just a variation of the King's Indian defense, which is the Fianchetto King's Indian. This move here, these two moves right there. Now the Fianchetto King's Indian defense, it should promise white a stable long-term advantage, as most Fianchettos in chess promise. But I feel it's a bit too slow, to be honest. I would prefer to play something more incisive against the King's Indian defense. And there are many ways for black, especially with the Yates variation, which is this. This is the Yates variation, which is commonly played against the King's Indian defense. Fianchetto variation that white employs. Black employs the Yates variation. Again, it's this kind of stuff. This usually offers black some nice counter chances. So I personally don't really like the King's Indian Fianchetto, but hey. So d6, normal move, knight f3, and now c5, breaking in the center. So Amr doesn't go for the Yates variation, which is of course fine. c5 is just another way to treat this position, but I myself prefer that variation. And here Adib could have played d5, but maybe he was afraid of some e6s, reminiscent of his game against Khalid Shaib, which we saw in round 3. So maybe he didn't want to see that, so he went for castles instead. Knight c6, and now Adib plays a rather creative move, b3, which basically forces equality, or yeah, it does force equality basically. If you want to play for a win, you play d5, knight a5, knight d2, and this is one of the ways black can play this position, eventually playing a6, b5, rook b8, kind of like a delayed Yates variation, and having some nice pressure along the long diagonal and some nice pressure on the king's side. So yeah, this would promise white an advantage, but it's very double-edged, of course, so black can of course win as well. Instead, b3 forces black's next move, which is takes. Now of course, if black doesn't take, then white will Fianchetto, play e3, and enjoy a long-term advantage with the two Fianchettoed bishops. So instead of takes, and now knight e4, d5 would have equalized, and we'll see why in a moment. So the point of all of these trades in the center is that you make use of this weakened diagonal. So that's why b3 equalizes. Now the problem here is that knight e4 isn't the best way to meet the queen being here. Instead, you should just break in the center. And the point is that after takes and takes, now you get this kind of discovery. So that's why it's important to break here. And if black is able to get through d5, he'll open up the center and shouldn't have any problems. So d5 equalizes. Instead, knight e4 runs into the following, which is queen takes, bishop takes, and now the amazing bishop g5, which Adib did not find. Of course, I don't blame him at all. It's very difficult to foresee why this is a good move. Adib instead went for the very liquidating bishop h6. Takes, you just trade. One rook, and then the bishop comes back, you just traded everything. Of course, here white should have an advantage due to the space advantage, basically, and the fact that these pawns, I mean, I can play here and these kinds of ideas. And there's pressure on the queen side, of course. But Amr was up to the task to defend, and it's not like the position is basically equal. It's not so impossible to defend. But of course, Amr did a good job. Instead, Adib could have tried Adib could have tried to play bishop g5, which is a brilliant move. Now let's see the two likely variations. Of course, you might be asking, first of all, why can't I take the exchange? And the reason isn't what you think it is. It's not taking back here and trying to go for a long-term advantage on the dark squares or anything like that. No, it's more concrete actually. You just take the pawn here. And it's not working tactically. If the rook, for example, tries to win the queen, I just take here. Remember that the queen is defended. So takes, and here in this position, I'm up. What am I? I'm up a pawn, and this pawn is super weak. And yeah, this is basically winning. When I'm up 2 pawns, it's easily winning, and there's even queenside pressure. So this would be losing. And instead, after bishop takes e5, if d5, trying to distract the queen, I just go to h4, keeping the attack on the queen and the rook. And if something like queen b6, I just take, and now I have bishop takes d5 coming. And you can't take on c4 because then I win the exchange, and it's just a super easy position to play. And if you don't take, then okay, I'm down the exchange, but I have 2 pawns for it, and the bishop pair, and a very strong attack and very nice pieces. So this is also winning. So bishop takes a1 would be losing actually. And instead, after queen a5, attacking the bishop and getting out of the tempo here with bishop takes e7, I will take with the queen. You take here, I take back. And now we're into these kind of sacrificial ideas, you see, where I sacrifice the exchange, but I get dark squared pressure in return. And here for white, it's very good. So queen e5 trying to trade, and if the trade occurs, bishop d5 cementing the bishop on a powerful diagonal. f6 is impossible. Bishop e6 would run into this, or maybe even, I wonder if bishop takes e6 is possible. But of course you'd take the pawn. And here white has a good advantage. We're down the exchange, but we have dark squared pressure, we have strong bishops, we'll probably win back the pawn. And if we win this pawn, we have some nice passers here. Black isn't completely lost, but white is much better. So bishop g5 would have been a brilliant move to try to gain an advantage. And black would have been hard pressed to do anything about it. Instead, bishop h6 was played. 1 second, make sure the audio is working. Okay. Bishop h6, takes, bishop f6. And this should be just equal. I'll go through the moves a bit quickly. Black is doing well, trying to push b5, attacking the queen, gaining tempo, gaining some time. And white is trying to some pushes on the queen side, trying to gain advantage, but it's not really working. And here actually Amr commits a slight, well, not a slight inaccuracy, actually a mistake, which is bishop d7. The thing is, it's difficult also to spot why this is winning for, well, not winning, why this is better for white. We'll see just why in a second, but actually here Adib played bishop f3, and after bishop c6 putting pressure here, the game, eventually I can show you the game. There wasn't much going on here, and they agreed to withdraw. Here it's difficult. White could still play on, to be honest, but against such a high rated opponent, I don't blame Adib for taking a draw, and it's of course drawn, I mean, technically speaking. Instead here he had a very nice option, which is e5. The point being, some of this stuff here, and what was it? No, actually, no, yeah, there were some lines that had to do with d7. So basically the two tactical points are that you have c5 and that the bishop here is hanging, so keep that in mind. So if the bishop retreats, you take, and you win a pawn. And this is why this is better. Okay, you win a pawn, but the conversion is still not so easy. I mean, before you had an advantage, and it was not at all easy, and even with an extra pawn, it's still not that easy. So still you have a lot of work to do here to convert this position, especially against a strong defender like Amr. So after e5, if d takes e5, trying to just take the pawn, Here you have the very brilliant c5. Of course you don't capture here because that wouldn't make much sense, sacrificing the pawn like that. So here you have the very brilliant c5. And if black takes, of course if they don't take, this is coming, and remember there is this, so black would be hard pressed to defend against both threats. Takes, and now the very brilliant takes as well. You don't take back like this or like this. First you take, and you'll see why in a second. If bishop takes, of course, now you take like this, and hello, it's a fork. And yeah, bishop c7 is the only way to protect both, and queen c1, and it's game over. Note that this doesn't work. So that would be a nice way to win the game. And instead of the bishop retreats, now you have bishop takes c5, and the point is you're winning one of these pawns and you're going to emerge a pawn up, and with lots of positional compensation to boot. So this should be basically winning. Much better for white at least, because of course in some variations black can take back here, but in general white should win most of these positions. So as you can see here, not many things to talk about in this game. Adib played a very smart variation here to liquidate, to force a draw, and Amr didn't really have much else. Like he could have tried to be worse and try to win from there, but if he wants to be solid and just play a game, then he should take advantage of b3 and just liquidate and go for the draw. Here knight e4 wasn't accurate though, but Adib also missed like 2 winning chances, and they were extremely difficult to spot, so I don't blame him. They're like very difficult to spot in a game, these kinds of ideas. Now e5 here maybe is more intuitive. e5 is a very like in this kind of structure, e5 is a very natural move. It's something you should think about, especially connected with c5, because you see that the rook is lined up. But of course, I mean, I bet he was on time pressure here. It's very difficult to see still. So very nice draw for Adib. Very impressive result. And for Amr, a bit disappointing to draw against the 1900, of course. Who's not really 1900, but still. Still, he's on 3.5, and he can't complain about much. Next up, we have Faisal against Akram. Another draw for the lower rated player. Both of Akram also is I think the same age as Adib, or maybe older by a year. So it's also a very impressive result for the rising young talent. What did I want to say also? Oh yeah, this game was actually very complicated in contrast to the previous game, but it still ended in a draw. So let's see how. We got to see that Trompovsky. Faisal has been trying the Trompovsky, especially against... actually, I wanted to say against low-rated opponents, but I've seen him play it against Amro Jawich in like 4 or 5 years ago. So maybe 3 years ago. 3 years ago, yeah. Yeah. So actually, it's a weapon he uses quite frequently. d5, e3, not going for the doubling of pawns just yet, but after c5 this kind of forces white's hand, because now black has the option to play queen b6, attacking b2, and putting pressure on the bishop. Not pressure, I mean being able to capture with the queen if you don't want to ruin the pawn structure. So white finally takes, g takes, intending to push e5 at some point. D takes c5, trying to win the pawn back, and now knight c6. Instead, maybe e6 was a bit better, just trying to win the pawn immediately. I get that it blocks in the bishop, but this bishop doesn't really have much purpose outside of the pawn chain in either case, and it will eventually get out of the pawn chain at some later point. And this is the kind of structure you want to go for, by the way, when you have these kinds of doubled pawns. You don't really want to push through e5 because that weakens the f5 square. So he plays knight c6, still retaining his options. And here Faisal had the option of playing a3, intending to push through with b4, which sounds very strange, but you just cement the pawn. You keep the pawn. Now, if, of course, black had played e6, then this a3 b5 would make zero sense, especially because white is lacking this dark squared bishop. So knight f3 developing, but yeah, a3 instead was much better, because now knight f3 allows e5. And actually, yes, f5 is a weakness, so you'd think like e5 in principle is not a very good positional move, but here it's gaining so much space in the center, and white is hard pressed to be able to develop the pieces. The bishop will take on c5. The black pieces will gain a lot of firepower. So this would this is actually quite a good move. Here, for what it's worth, white had to go for bishop b5 for better or worse, because he has to try to take to double the pawns. So that yes, black has the bishop pair, but then the did I say double the pawns? I didn't mean double the pawns. To kind of just weaken the pawn structure on the queen side, because if you get to see like this a6 b5 kind of stuff, this would be very advantageous for black. And I think yes, actually it did occur in this game. It's been a while since I looked at this game. And by the way, anyone wondering about queen a5 check, we always have knight c3. So you want to take here just so that after takes back, yes, of course, black gets the b file. It looks like a very strange decision to try to take here, but the deep point here is that you want to avoid this kind of queenside expansion ideas, because then black will not have them. And defending against rook b8 is quite simple with b3. Of course, there are weaknesses that will come about after after the bishop takes on c5, but still it's better than having to face a6 b5, which is what happened in the game. So keep that in mind. So bishop b5, bishop takes b5 was potentially a much better idea. And of course here, like the normal move bishop d7 to try not to get the doubled pawns, loses to queen takes d5. Not loses, but you lose a pawn. And yeah, probably the game is close to lost because you lose a lot of your trumps as black. So very bad explanation, I know. But you'll get to see why bishop takes c6 is such a good positional move, even though it seems very anti-positional, in just a few. Instead he went for c4, and now Akram gained space with d4. Takes. Actually, takes would have been possible, but e4 is also nice, displacing and misplacing the knight. And now queen takes d4, and you get to see this is not pretty. This might be coming at some point as well. This might be coming. This is not pretty. So c4 kind of also a mistake, because at least here, like, maybe you can even play c3 to try to prevent d4. Now of course after bishop takes you're still going to face d4, but like, I don't know, in principle, like, I would prefer c3 to c4, but both are bad, to be honest. So you should play bishop b5. So anyway, c4, d4, takes knight here, e4, knight c3, and now Akram goes for queen e5, which is very good. He's like, e3 is very tempting, but Akram is smart enough to know that it's just enticing for no good reason, because after takes queen here, you trade off, and the knight comes here with all kinds of nasty threats, and here white should be fine, actually maybe even slightly better. So that's why e3 is actually premature. So you have to, because your king still isn't castled. So while white's also isn't castled, liquidating into the endgame doesn't help. Or going into the endgame, not liquidating into the end. And here, Faisal went for knight b3. I don't blame him for this decision, trying to defend the pawn a bit more, get some scope with the queen, maybe the knight. But maybe bishop e2, trying to castle very quickly, was a bit better. But here still black has a 5 with a 4, bishop g7 or bishop e7 or bishop g7, bishop e6, Black is still, of course, much better, but bishop e2 maybe offered better chances than knight b3. But of course, the knight b3 can't be faulted at all. But now we see a very nice move by Akram. Bishop e6, simple development. This is the best square for the bishop actually in this position. Not bishop f5, of course not bishop g4 because that would hang the bishop. But not bishop f5 or bishop d7 or whatever. Bishop e6 is very, very good. And now Faisal plays queen e2, preparing to castle. And Akram goes for f5, defending e4. Now actually he could have castled immediately, not caring about the pawn, because after takes there's this nice knight b4 idea. The point being that after takes, knight c2 check, king here, f takes, of course, and the rook moves here, you have this kind of stuff, and the king on f3 isn't going to be very happy for very long. Maybe some of these ideas. Of course your bishop is hanging here, but yeah, after you deal with that, yeah, so here black should be slightly better. So castles was possible. You just had to see that after takes there's this knight b4 idea. After you see that knight b4 is a possibility, you can easily work out knight c2 check and all of that. So here you can work out knight c2 check, but seeing that knight b4 is a possibility is what's difficult in this line. So not playing castles is also he can't be blamed for not playing castles immediately. Instead he goes f5. I mean, in principle defending the pawn isn't such a bad move, but now white is able to castle, and the worst is behind white, definitely, because now he's what's the pawn count, by the way? White is still up a pawn, but of course he'll lose this pawn, which is not a problem. But he might win one of the bishops out of this, so he shouldn't be that bad off. a5 was Akram's choice here. Not a bad idea, of course. Maybe developing or something was a bit better. Not really sure, but a5, of course, it's a very good move. And here Faisal went for knight a4, which is in principle nice, mechanically blocking a4. Queenside pressure is non-existent now because b5 or b6 are stopped. The pawn actually on c5 is protected, but there's a specific reason why knight a4 eventually turns out to be bad, and it's something we get to see in the game. So knight a4, like, no human will ever not play knight a4 in this position, but the engine sees that after what happened in the game, knight a4 actually turns out to distract from black's position more than detract, sorry. So here he should have actually played the very anti-positional a4, and yeah, no human is playing that. And the point here is to just play after bishop g7, queen e3, solidifying all the crucial squares. Of course, taking or anything like that can always be met by knight d5 and even knight takes c5 depending. So yeah, what did I want to say? Yeah, so knight a4 can't be faulted at all. Bishop g7, g3, and now knight b4, which is perhaps a bit questionable. Just castling, playing the necessary moves first. Black should castle, there's no reason not to, so why not do it now? Knight b4 is maybe too aggressive. Now I get the tempting knight d3 and all of that, but actually white has a brilliant tactical nuance to get out of it. So so yeah, let's see what happened. King b1, getting out of knight d3 check, and knight d3 anyway, which is actually a big mistake, handing over the advantage to white. Instead, again, black should just castle. Castle and avoid the hassle. The rooks can come at any point. You can play knight d3 at any point. There's no rush. White doesn't have anything. Like, he still needs one move to develop to get the rooks connected, and zero attack on the king's side. Black is so well covered on the king's side. Like, there's not even a slim chance for white to get anything going there, and it's just a slow crush for black. It should be. So Akram here kind of jumped the gun a bit by playing knight d3, and now this allows the following tactical possibility, which is very well spotted by Faisal. f4, of course, takes, you take here, so this isn't working, and now the knight on a4 is doing a good job, so let's see that. So takes, and actually you can even take and take here, so like the knight on a4 isn't necessarily important there, but you know, so that's not possible, so the queen has to retreat, and now you have queen c2. Yeah, so knight b4 back, trying maybe to gain a tempo or force a draw. So if let's say queen e2, maybe he would have retreated here, I don't know, offering some kind of draw. But Faisal actually plays for a win, which is the correct option, by playing queen c3. And now after something like h5, trying to go h4, which is a very smart positional move, black would have still retained reasonable chances. White is still slightly better here due to these kinds of ideas and these kinds of ideas, but black here also has a reasonable position. Instead he went for queen g6, and yes, I didn't forget a line, I'll show it in a second. Queen g6, and trying to just create the discovery and maybe insinuate some stuff here. Queen e3, castles finally, and a3, and the game was agreed a draw. Very premature, but I get why Faisal would offer the draw here. It's very difficult to see how white will play this position, but now actually you get to see that perhaps white has a little bit of something on the king side because black delayed castling so much. Maybe there's some of these ideas here, so it's not too bad. So like for example, after bishop 2 you have rook d6, h4, h5. So white could have played on, but it's understandable why Faisal did not. Even though he controls the queen side, he saw that on the king side he doesn't have much. The bishop pair looks scary, and he definitely didn't want to lose the game, so he didn't want to take the risk and play on from this position. But in principle, white should have an advantage. But yeah, over the board, like it's easy to even assess this position as being better for black, or maybe even winning for black over the board. So yeah, and anyway, just to close off here, so instead of knight b4, black had the brilliant sacrifice knight takes b2. Seemingly doesn't work because you have a lot of defenders there, so takes. But what's going on here? a4. So this is I should annotate a4 with as being a brilliant move. Yeah, this is of course impossible for a human to see. If Akram was able to spot that tactic, I would have asked Faisal to frisk Akram. Yeah, so yeah, that's not happening. Knight d4, and the point here, so still I haven't explained the point, you'll see it in just a second. a3, the knight is trapped. Yeah, who's going to see that? So knight takes e6, f takes e6, knight d3, and here this is just a draw. You can of course take, but bishop g2 is more incisive, trying to pressure here, because you can take the pawn anytime you want. So yeah, knight takes b2 would have been crazy, but it would have offered black some liquidating chances immediately. Instead he got the draw, like in any case, so it didn't matter. Yeah, so overall, like, it's even difficult to explain this game. Like, even when you have the engine evaluations and you've taken some time to look at the variations yourself, and you've seen how the game transpired to better understand the plans and all of that, it's still like difficult to, because it's so concrete basically. Like for example here, knight a4, it's still difficult to explain why this is such an inaccuracy or a mistake, because yeah, it's just difficult. It turns out like in some lines the knight isn't even protecting b2, like for example the line we just saw here. So the knight isn't even really protecting b2. But like, how are you supposed to see that from so far off? It's all just so very concrete. What's important to take away from the game though is that Faisal misplayed the trump badly in the opening, to be honest. Here this isn't such a great line. Akram played one of the best lines against Trombovsky. And here knight f3 isn't such a great idea. He should have tried to keep the pawn. And since then it was basically very bad for white. But Faisal played well. Yeah, so very complicated game, but a fair result overall. Both sides missed some chances and it was a draw. Okay, so so Imad against Antoine. Imad has been, again, he's been improving quite a bit. Played some very nice chess in this tournament. So let's see how he went off here. He got off here, so we got to see basically the Benoni here, d5 and e5. Now this is a questionable move because you can't play the check Benoni against knight c3. And again, from Antoine, this is a bit surprising. I don't know if Antoine is very active in terms of chess lately. I don't think he is, because yeah, he's a great theoretician. It's weird to go for this variation because this is considered bad because white is able to go for this very quickly. Against d5, you guys see me of course on this channel playing e6 always. Well, d6, e6. If you want to go for the check Benoni lines. Yeah, so e5 is going for, insisting on the check Benoni is questionable. e4, and now bishop b5 check. Knight f3 also with these knight d2, knight c4 ideas in mind was also possible. Bishop b5 check, knight b d7, and now knight g2, which is almost shocking. Here your advantage lies in the fact that black's pieces are so misplaced. So you should just play a4, and after the bishop is kicked, bishop d3, and then knight f3, knight d2, knight c4. So here knight g2 is misplacing your own piece. So sorry. So the point is that black's pieces are misplaced and this is bad, but instead here white is misplacing their own piece. Knight g2, it has no real prospects. Okay, knight g3, knight f5, knight h5, all of this isn't optimal at all. No need to do that. The issue with black playing e5 against knight c3 is that knight f3, knight d2, knight c4 is possible. Instead of like you see c4 here and this kind of stuff, here the check Benoni is playable because white doesn't have this kind of maneuver. So very, very important thing to keep in mind. Okay, knight g2, a6, and now giving up the bishop pair. Not really necessary, but I can see that he wanted to avoid bishop d3, b5. But after b5 you have knight g3, and yeah, you're much better here as white. Now, just to explain a bit why giving up the bishop pair is bad here. It seems good because you're getting rid of your bad light squared bishop, right? And you also get rid of one knight from their side. So in this closed position, getting rid of one knight should be advantageous. Yes, all of these are good reasons why bishop takes d7 is a good move. But why is bishop d3 better? Because you have a space advantage, and as I explained in round 3, when you have a space advantage, you want to keep pieces on the board. That principle, keeping pieces on the board when you have a space advantage, is more important than secondary considerations such as that you get to have one more knight or you get rid of your bad bishop. So very important to keep in mind. Space is very, very important. It sometimes even trumps material, as we saw from AlphaZero against Stockfish. So that's why bishop d3 would have been slightly better. Now, of course, you could argue that black gains their own space on the king side, queen side, and I do understand that sentiment, but you always have a4 and you can chip away at this kind of structure very easily as white, because black lacks space. So lacks control. So bishop takes, still not so bad for white. A4 and b5 anyway. And here after queen d3 you keep the position closed, so you retain all of remember, you're down the bishop pair, right? So okay, this bishop might be bad, but it always has these kinds of ideas. So and the center is closed, so these kinds of maneuvers are possible. Check Benoni, guys. Yeah, I know a thing or two about the check Benoni. I've been playing it for how many years? 5 years. Yeah, so so queen d3, keeping the center closed, keeping the position closed, was much better. Instead, opening up the position for the bishop pair, not so good. I mean, yeah, okay, he gets to trade a lot of pieces and develop, but yeah, that's a bit questionable. F takes e5. So still here, like, white has a reasonable position. It's not lost or anything, it's just slightly worse. But here Antoine goes for a very weird blunder. B takes c3. And you'll get to see why this is wrong. So here he should have just taken, and after knight ce2, black of course has an advantage. You can play this to block the pawn, and you have some of these ideas. Push through on the queen side, get some queen side pressure. White doesn't even really have that much to play for, so also all good. So instead bishop takes b takes c3, and now e takes f6. Of course you have to do that. That's forced. But now after c takes b2, by the way, bishop takes b2, and yeah, this is super strong. Obviously after takes you get the ruined pawn structure, knight h5 and all of that good stuff. That would have been obvious. What's not obvious is what happens after bishop takes. And can you guess it? It's something that's very similar to a game Anish Giri played against Van Foreest, Jordan Van Foreest, in the Tata Steel 2022 edition, right? It wasn't in the 2021 edition. Yeah, it was a brilliant game there by Jordan. So yeah, if you guys know the game, you know the sacrifice. Rook takes f6, g takes f6, knight h5. And queen f3 with knight takes f6, queen g3 checkmating ideas are possible. And when the queen comes to f3 or g3, you also can pick up the c3 pawn, and the bishop can come to b2 where it applies pressure. So a very, very natural rook sacrifice, exchange sacrifice, unfortunately wasn't played. Instead he played bishop takes b takes c3, kind of blundering the game away. Bishop takes, queen f3, bishop d4 check. Yeah, and here he was like, for example, here, okay, it's natural to take because the queen is attacking c2, but yeah, I kind of felt he was a bit too trade happy here. So for example, queen f4 is questionable. Why not just cement the pawn with c4? And you get to see that actually this pawn turns out to be a weakness later on, much later on in the game. So queen f4 takes, yeah, this kind of endgame. Knight f1, maybe going for knight e3 to cement the c2 pawn was better. Instead he went for c3. Yeah, this kind of endgame should be holdable, but it's going to be very difficult. And now rook b1, which is maybe a slightly questionable move, and you'll see why in just a second. Instead here h5 should have been trying to play h4 and distract the rook. So if knight h1, which is the best move, you get to see h4, knight f2 development. You can't take, of course, because of g5, and bye bye Mr. Rook. So knight f2, and here you can't take here, of course, because the rook is applying pressure on the knight. Rook c2, and the game should be slightly better for black, of course, because of the pressure here, but white can try to survive. So h5 would have been a brilliant move. And if instead king f2, for example, trying to activate the king, then the rook comes in, kicking the king back. And now you get to see that the bishop will start applying a lot of pressure here. So let's say king h2. The thing is, white doesn't really have any active moves. Sorry, I went through that quickly. So rook f3, h4, knight h2, rook e2, attacking the weakened pawn, knight f2, and bishop a4. And there's no good way to stop bishop c2, which will simply win the pawn. If you play rook f4, there's always just g5, and it's impossible to defend all of your pawns, so you're going to lose this position. It's just too passive. So h5 would have been a brilliant move, actually, also gaining space. Instead he went rook b1 check, rook f1, and trading here is also too helpful. But I guess when you're in this position, you have to contend with rook f2, rook f3, back and forth, so you kind of have to trade. But here this should be just drawn, basically. And here after f5, this should be holdable. Instead, Imad, I guess in time pressure, just blundered the game away with c4. Yep. Such a shame this game ended like that. Imad was like putting up a really good fight, but yeah. Instead here we can look at some computer lines. So I just let it run a bit after e takes f5, and it should be a draw. So we got to see here this check, of course, not this check, I meant f6. So here this should be drawn instead of bishop e8. You go back here, and see, that's why earlier I mentioned c4 would have been nice to have, because then this wouldn't be a weakness. But even with this pawn being a weakness, the knight is so jumpy, you get to win some of these pawns sometimes, and this should be a draw. So for example here, if takes, what happens? You can win which pawn? I didn't look at this. Yeah, okay, if we attack here, they go king e5. So let's attack this one. If they go h6, we come up here. Yeah. And you're going to take this pawn soon, so let's say this. And then maybe here. Is this a bit slow what I'm doing? I guess it is. Okay, what's the... So king takes d5, right? Let's see if we can find something easier. Maybe knight g5, h6, knight f7, h5, knight h6, attacking here, but then king e5, and we're back to the same thing. Yeah, of course, it's not these positions you lose. Like, if you see this position on Title Tuesday or something. Okay, so I was right. I found knight g5, h6, knight f7, h5, knight g5, but then king e5. Check, and okay. Yeah, kind of similar to the lines we were looking at. So knight f8 would be maybe a bit inaccurate. Here it's just losing. Yeah, you can't give up the square. You need to maintain like this square. You can't allow the king to pass here. Okay, so yeah, if you're seeing some titled arena or something, definitely black will win these kinds of positions many times, but you can see how this could be drawn also. So for example this. So what's important is just to activate the king, your king, the white king, and try to create some kind of fortress. Don't let black just win the queenside pawns as I did with that knight c4, king c4 stuff here. So don't do that. Yeah, and you can try to draw that way. We're taking a look at some more variations. 3 king b3. You always have this knight f4 check idea. When you get c4 in, it's kind of difficult for black to win, but also seems dangerous because black can always attack this. But you also have to think that the bishop is only attacking here, so as long as you're defending that, you're completely fine. And the king doesn't have any avenues to break through. You're also always controlling any f4 sacrificial ideas, so yeah. So unfortunate that Imad wasn't able to put up some of this. Like at least if he lost like this, he wouldn't have felt so bad about this. But instead, he just blundered a fork. So tough for him. Okay, so wow, it's already been 45 minutes. I thought this would be a shorter video. Okay, so we have Joe against Abdulaziz. Very impressive win by Joe. So let's see what happened here. c4, e5. Joe going for a Dutch kind of setup, and now goes for e4, which is maybe a bit premature, but after e3 actually e4 is yeah, e4 is basically the best move, no? Yeah, g6 is the best move. e4 is interesting. I gave it dubious, but it's really interesting, to be honest. Dubious, I mean, from a technical perspective, but yeah, maybe in classical it's a bit dubious. But actually, what I play here is d5, a very nice gambit line. The point being here. So the only way for white is to give up the pawn. You've seen me play this a lot on stream. Yeah. If instead they try to be greedy, you play e4, and this is a big threat. You get some of this action here. So yeah. So d5 was interesting, g6 was good, g6 good move, d5 interesting move, e4 instead, d3, should be 4, and the problem with with e4 is exactly d3. You're going to get weakened. You're going to get a weak position in the center quite quickly. But Joe knows his stuff, and he tries to gain some space on in the center. For example, here, like if takes, Joe knows full well that he can take like this or this, and eventually the pawns will get liquidated, and he'll emerge with a fine position. Like here, you probably just take, and this should be reasonable for black. So instead, Abdulaziz castled, and now Joe takes back, and he ends up losing a pawn, but it's not like, okay, he didn't technically lose a pawn because this is still there, but this is still a fine position. So c6, and now b3, which is a bit strange, to be honest. Okay, let's switch back to the white perspective. It's a bit strange. I get the point, which is what happened in the game. Takes, you get this open a file. I get the point, but I don't see why you don't try to win this pawn at least. For example, like with rook d1, you might have some of these ideas. I get there's b5 at all times, but you also have a4, have knight d4. You have pressure here, so that's why this position isn't so great for black. Instead, you want b3, and this should be, to be honest, after knight e6, you're getting a nice position as black. Bishop b2, castles, rook a4, bishop e7, and now rook a1. It's good to admit your mistakes, of course, but why play it in the first place? Rook a4 if you just attack the bishop and retreat. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe he noticed he wanted to play this, but then there's this. But of course he should have, he definitely saw that before, so I don't know. Here actually he could have played bishop c2, preempting this knight g5, knight c5 idea, and after something like knight g5, which is similar to what happened in the game, you have h4, enticing the knight to go to f3, after which you have king g2 and knight f4, and you trap the knight and win it. So you're basically much better to winning here. And if something like b5 trying to kick away the rook, you just retreat, and after check, bishop g4, you can always play knight f4 and just enjoy a very good position here. So bishop c2 preempting this knight c5 would have been a much better idea. Though it's also, of course, difficult to part ways with the bishop that's protecting this diagonal. But you have to see that basically the bishop is more of a liability here because the king wants to be here. And this is difficult to see, but when you spot that idea that it's the king that needs to be on g2, you can play such moves. So instead, he played rook a1, and now knight g5 comes, bishop d3, though he still understood that bishop g2 isn't desirable. So knight f3 check, which is a mistake, driving the advantage back in white's court. Instead, he should have played rook d8, attacking the bishop, gaining further time. And here the bishop is hard pressed to find any good squares. Bishop c4, there's b5, of course, so you have to basically go to b1 and or get the rook to d1, and it's starting to look ugly. Instead, knight f3 check, king g2, and this is the point. Good, very good understanding by Abdulaziz to play king g2 to get the bishop off the diagonal. The bishop doesn't need to be on g2. b5, rook fd1, and now bishop f6, another slight inaccuracy. After takes, you get knight e5, knight f4, and now you can see why white is just simply better, right? Material is equal, white has a good knight, white has this kind of pressure here, white has this open file here, so white should be better. Knight e5, bishop e4, and now there's some semblance of pressure here along this diagonal. And for whatever reason, Abdulaziz played h3. I'm not sure of the reason. We should maybe ask Joe about that. I guess he wanted to sacrifice the exchange. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe he just outright blundered. Like he forgot the rook was attacked. Maybe that's what happened. So yeah, h3 just loses the game. And you can see that Joe's conversion later on was flawless. Instead, he should have just went rook dc1, and after something like g5, we have knight d5, which is a brilliant way to gain an advantage. The point being that takes wins the rook, so that's not happening, and any check you can just take. Yeah, maybe actually he missed that after rook dc1, g5 he has knight d5. Maybe that's what he missed. I mean, still, like, maybe, like, yeah, he can play knight d3. And yeah, like, why wouldn't he play this position? Did he think that losing the exchange was better than this position? Like, knight d3 isn't accurate, actually. Knight d5 is better, but if you spot knight d3, you know you're not losing. So yeah, I don't know why not. Knight h3 would be a blunder, though, basically, because of this. And black gets a lot of activity. And these kinds of ideas are coming, so... black is much better here. Better. I give it a slightly better. Yeah, whatever. Slightly better. Yeah, so surprising. He didn't... like, knight d3 is very normal to see, so I don't know what happened there. So after that, the game just played itself. So let's see how Joe converted. So he does spot the knight d5 idea as well. So I don't know. He must have just completely forgotten. Like he spotted some difficult ideas to give credit where credit is due. Abdulaziz spotted some nice ideas. He understood that the king on g2 is better than the bishop being on g2. That's a very deep idea. And he understood that this knight d5 tactic. So yeah. Overall, nice result for Joe, gaining a lot of rating points, and a bit of a sad result for Abdulaziz, especially with that blunder. Hey, what you gotta do? Okay, so the fifth and final game for this video. Again, as I mentioned, we won't be looking at the other 21 boards because that will just take too long. Already, we're almost at an hour, so. Let's see if I can do this. This was a really short game, so let's see if I can do it in like 6 minutes. Yeah, so it was Sursock against Gio. Very nice result also for Gio. For any of you guys who don't know anything about Sursock, by the way, he was one of the first Lebanese champions. One of the first Lebanese championships. He won the championship, I think, in 1972, something like that. So, so one of the first Lebanese champions. Very, very strong player. Yeah, so let's start off. It was, though, this game wasn't very inspiring. Gio opting for a Kaloust, of course, a bit of a surprising decision considering he's always been a Sicilian player, but people have been changing their repertoires. Yeah, this is just a very staid variation. All of this is theory and normal moves. Up until this point where perhaps knight e5, this move was played by Carlsen. Maybe it's a way to try to get an advantage. Instead, bishop takes d6, just trades more pieces, and yeah, this isn't much. And now bishop f1. Perhaps more interesting was to try to play for an advantage as white, was to play this. At least here you're up a pawn, but of course black has a lot of activity. Yeah, bishop f1 is a more solid move. Knight e4, rook a d1, rook f d8. Perhaps taking and trying to trade more pieces was better. Maybe knight c6 later at some point as well. Of course you don't want to play knight c6 without make sure queen takes b7 isn't there, but yeah. Yeah, but rook f d8 should be fine. And now queen a4. Kind of blundering away the advantage. Black had the possibility after queen a4 to play knight f6 and try to maintain pieces and make use of white's error, which we'll see just in a second. Why this is an error. It's an error basically because it just helps black draw the game. For example, after queen b6, which is what happened in the game, a lot of piece trades happened. And okay, actually the game continued for longer than I thought, so let's go back to the main point. So queen a4, the reason this move isn't so great, it liquidates and help black get a normal position. Instead you have to hit while the iron is hot. So actually I should annotate rook f d8 as a dubious move. And yeah, so strike while the iron is hot. g4, brilliant move. What happens if knight takes d2? You just take back, and after bishop g6, now you take. And notice that the b2 pawn is defended, so you just win a pawn for you just win a pawn as white. And if bishop g6, now you take the bishop pair, take here, take, and you win a pawn. Of course these squares are a bit weak, but you're up a pawn. So g4 basically wins a pawn by force. A bit difficult to foresee, but yeah, that's it. So instead, actually rook f d8 should just be a mistake. So that's why knight takes d2 was needed. So yeah, queen a4, queen b6. So now this isn't anything special anymore. So that's why queen a4 wasn't so good, because it missed the opportunity. And now we get to see a very nice tactic here. White should have played bishop c2 so that this square remains covered, because after takes you have this, and of course queen takes b2 runs into check, picking up the queen. So this would have been a nice tactic to try to prevent e5, because if e5 comes, black should equalize, and this is what happened in the game. So white thought he was preventing e5, but Gio sees further. He's not. Takes, and the reason is here. So after e5, everything just gets liquidated, and this is just a draw. Of course they could have played on, but yeah, no side is winning this. It's obviously a draw. So very nice game by Gio to dry out the position and not lose in any way, because Sursock is a very dangerous player, of course. Now Sursock went for a rather staid option, but he was trying to play positionally and get an advantage that way, and he could have gotten an advantage at certain points, but it did not work out. So yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Let me show you the standings. So we have here no one is on 4 out of 4. Oh, you can't see it. So no side is on 4 out of 4. You can see that no person is on 4 out of 4. You can see that Adib and Akram and Amr are on 3.5, while Faisal is on 3 points. Imad is on 2.5. Kassis is on 3.5, also with Amr, Faisal, and Amr, Akram, and Adib. Oh, Joe is also on 3.5. Yeah, okay. Let's recap. Amr, Adib, Akram, Joe, Kassis, 5 people on 3.5. You have Faisal on 3, and you have Imad on 2.5, and you have Abdulaziz on 2.5, and you have Mahdi on 3, and yeah. So that's it for this video, guys. Let me just fix the scene while I'm here. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the games and the analysis. The games were very difficult to analyze this time around, actually. Very tough games, very complicated. But yeah, hopefully you understood the deep points behind them. Hopefully I was able to explain them as best as I could. Yeah, I tried my best, especially for that Faisal Akram game. Like, it's difficult to wrap your head around it. Alright guys, so that's it for this video, and with that I bid you adieu. Alright guys, take care.